Welcome back to some more exciting Material UI. Again, I'm Myron, just happy to be here to show you some more features. So we've added some grid in, we've added some typography in, we've taken a look at what layout means across our entire application here, but let's take a look at form fields. So over in Material UI, there's going to be a couple different fields that you can use. Now in their components, they put them into this inputs section. We've got buttons, which we've already seen before. We've seen buttons, but we've got text fields, we've got some switches, sliders, radio buttons, selects. Now for us, the text field and select are going to be the primary ones that we need. We're not using any radio buttons or sliders in our application. So let's take a look at text field first. So over here in text field, we've got some options here for how this could look. Now, if I click in here, you'll notice like this transitions up. Pretty cool, right? Like this is actually a label that transitions through there. Now, I'm kind of leaning towards this outlined one. We've got fill, we've got standard, we've got outline, but we're going to take a look at all of them first. I'm just going to stub them in as text field, and then we're going to start moving from there. So here we're going to remove some of the other components here so that we're just looking at the edit page itself. Now in the edit page we need to bring in text field. So let's import text field up at the top. And then we'll start using it across the board. So there's one specific thing once we enter in a text field here. We're going to go to our first field, our image field here, and I'm going to put in the text field. Now text field, you'll notice that I didn't open up text field like this with an opening tag and a closing tag. I made it a self-closing tag. This is because it doesn't really take in any child elements or elements inside of those two tags, inside of an opening and closing tag. So as you can see here, it's a self-closing tag. Now what we really want to concentrate on is the label here. What the label is this area here that we're using. Now our labels are written in a specific way for how we've initially stubbed this in, but what we want is to put in the attribute of label and then give it some sort of value. In this case, it should be the exact same text that we were using before. So I'm going to put this text in here, and then we're going to see how that looks in comparison to what we had before. So now we were looking here at the image one, so we're going to scroll down here to the image one. Right? So this is our new text field, as opposed to what we had down here before. Now, I totally cut out of that space this text here. I'm going to paste it back in so you can see what I'm talking about with the labels from our previous one. So we've got image field, and we've got the same sort of label thing going on here. Right? And then it's going to be up to us to figure out how we want that to style. So all I'm going to do right now is replace all of these fields with text field and make sure that they have the right labels. Alright, so that looks like all of our form fields. We'll refresh the page and we'll see, so we certainly have one for each of these. Now there's some additional ones if like we're here on the type, if we click on here it gives us a drop down. But that's a select, that is not the inputs that we're looking at here, and we're really only concerned about the inputs right now. Now a big thing to consider here is these are text area, right? They're not just a simple input. Right? Because we want them larger. They're going to have large descriptive bits of text. So we want to see if text field can handle a text area, or if we need to use a different kind of component. So let's scroll down and see if they've got something that works. So they're showing us different variations, error states here. We're seeing some more variations here. Specifically, we're seeing a multi-line here, and that's kind of what we're gonna want to go after, is the multi-line. But as you can see, they have a lot of different options. The big thing for us is that we want to go after that multi-line, so let's go ahead and take a look at what they have for the multi-line. So we've got multi-line here. We're going to open up the code and see what we've got. So they imported TextField, so we're still working just with TextField. Come down here and let's see what we have. Labels multi-line, we're already working with label, but then it's got an attribute of multi-line. Then it's got some rows on it and value and on change. We're not really going to worry about these two just yet because these are pretty standard when we have form fields. You have some sort of associated value and an on change. But for us specifically, we want to worry about multi-line and rows max. So we're going to come back over to our code, and I'm going to drop these two down because these are the ones that we want to be the multi-line. We're just going to put in the multi-line without the rows max first because we should just sort of see what that looks like and see what it's giving us out of the box. So it doesn't look like that big of a difference, right? So we're going to go ahead and do the max rows to help us out. I'm making it pretty big. I'm giving it a max rows of 10. I'm going to put it on both of them so they're nice and consistent. Now again, these don't look like they're that big, right? So let's see what other things they had in place over here on this multi-line to make it a little bit larger. So now we're looking at multi-line with default value here. So we should be able to scroll down to nearly the last one. Default value, got its different variants, multi-line, and then it's got rows, not max rows. Right? On the other one we saw max rows, but we were just looking at the first one, so technically that's this one. So let's just change our max rows to rows. Certainly it did give us a big change here, right? So we've got a large area, which is nice. That's exactly what we were hoping for. It would be nice if it spanned this whole distance here, right? So we're going to see if we've got some sort of property for that here in just a minute, but at first we just want to make sure that we've got all of this handled correctly. And then we're going to move the other interactive properties onto our form fields. So it's looking pretty good so far, so let's start removing our old form fields and moving the functional pieces onto the new form fields. So we'll start here with the image name. Again, I'm just making this multi-line because we're going to add a few attributes. So you'll notice that we have a default value set and we have on change set. So we're going to move those two over. And then we're going to remove this. And we're going to remove this and then take a look at it. Save, come back over. Now you'll notice default value did not add anything in. That's going to be a problem for us. So we want to see if we've got the ability to have default value. Now this one says default value, right? And we've got a few of them that say default value. This one, controlled, even has a default value. So let's check and see how they're doing that. So looks like it's using value on that first one, and this last one has a default value, so let's check the last one. So 1, 2, 3. Third one here does have default value. So we would expect that default value would totally come across. And if we're over here, we have default value. Default value looks correct because it is matching the same sort of default value we have here. Even if we copy and paste, same default value. So what we're expecting is that it actually has some value here when we print off to the page. Now, this could be an issue that we have to look up later and maybe see, oh, well, you know, it's not quite right because of some race condition. Race condition being maybe our reducer hasn't actually updated at the time that Material UI decided it's going to render our actual value. Because if I were to come in here and I were to change this default value, so I'm going to comment, I'm actually just going to remove this, and if we were to change this so that it was maybe a static thing that was added in, I'm going to add the static of default in here, and we're going to come over, and as the page refreshes, you can see that it's absolutely taking note of that. But it wasn't taking note of it when we were using the dynamic value. So something about our dynamic value is not getting updated right away when we want it to. Now this is something that we're going to have to play around with a little bit later. But for right now, I'm just going to worry about getting the rest of the information into the appropriate areas. And then once that's all clear, we'll go ahead and figure out how we want to get that to show up. Now let's go down here and we'll say these two, default and onChange, we want to move that to the name form field. So now TextField is going to have onChange and default. And then we can remove the old one. And then same thing with our physical description. And remove the old one. And then again, same thing with our background, removing the old one. Alright, so we've got a couple of them going on, right? These are side by side. Don't like that. We wanted them stacking, right? Form fields here, but they are all working, and actually our default values in these ones seem to be coming across just fine, but they're not coming across in these two, right? So again, something we're going to have to solve. But we know that we have value because in the previous forms that we had, we saw the value coming across. All I'm going to be concerned with at the moment is getting these things looking how I want them to look, and then we'll worry about getting the functional pieces in place. So let's go ahead and worry about that look. So here on these text fields, I don't know that I actually like it like this. I'd like it to look like it's substantial, like it's taking up space. So we're going to try the variant filled. And I'm actually going to start in the name field instead of the image input because it's nice and easy to see over here, and this is kind of the area that I want to look filled out. And I'm not making up filled on my own. We're totally looking at the styles that were up here. Standard, filled, outlined. And again, this is going to be variant. Most all of Material UI's components that you're changing the visual look of is called the variant attribute. So we'll be using the variant attribute to change the look most of the time. So let's go ahead and try the variant filled on the name. And I'm actually going to try it on the other two just so that we've got something that we can see consistent use out of. And come over here. Alright, so this filled isn't too bad, right? It's nice, it gives us some substantialness with the form fields, which isn't too bad. But let's check out the outline just to see which one we like the most. Alright, so outline's not bad either. Got a little bit of a problem here with the label getting adjusted correctly when the default value. But something that we could potentially take care of. But this is looking not too bad. I kind of like the outline. Right? Very consistent. and it's substantial, like it's got some substance to it. So let's go with the outline look, and then we'll use that across this whole area here. Now, there is a little bit of a trick here that I've got with this drop-down one, so we're going to have to adjust this a little bit to get it to be consistent with the rest of the form fields here, but certainly something that we can take care of, not something that's outside of our realm. So let's add this same variant to our image field so that they're all consistent. Alright, so they're all consistent. Now let's make it so that they take up the full width. So I want the image one to go full across the image, I want the name to go full across this space, same with these two, and I want them to be stacked. So let's see what kind of properties we might have for that. Now we've got some stuff stacked in here, right, but what I want to do, so this stacking is happening because the groups are wrapped with a div in each, that's what's making them stack. But what I want to do is see if there's something that makes it go a full distance, like this, right? Or I think we saw it a little bit higher up here. Nope, just down there. So let's see what that has. So we've got one that's going full distance here. Let's see how they're accomplishing that. So we'll open up the code, come down, and we see text field, some form controls. Another text field, and then we come down here and we have another text field. I think this is the one we're looking at. Label with normal text fields. Let's double check. With normal text fields, with normal, no, we want the one just before. So that should be I can't quite tell. Let's see here. What label is that? That's the amount label. So let's look for the amount label. So text field label, text fields. Wait. Password. Amount. So this is the one they're using, but they're using the form control, input label, and input. So they're using a different kind of setup here. So let's check our API and see if we've got a property that can handle this. Scrolling all the way to the bottom, and what we're looking for is our text field. So we're going to check out text field and see what kind of props we have. We have autocomplete, autofocus, default value, disabled, error, form helper text, full width. Okay, I think that's what we want. So let's look Boolean, so it just needs a true or false. Now, it says it needs a true or false, but the act of putting an attribute on means that it's true. So I should be able to take the name and do full width without actually saying true. Now we could put it in a true, but the act of doing this means that it's a true. That makes it a Boolean. So come over, oh, I forgot to save. Save. Come over here, make sure that we're refreshing. Doesn't look, oh, sorry, we were on the image field. So we're down here, and our image field is certainly going full width. Let's try adding that to these other three. Now again, these are a lot of attributes. You can see how it really starts to become a lot of attributes. This is why we do this multi-line with our attributes. It's just a lot easier to not only read, but manage. Alright, so we've got some stuff going on here. Not too bad. And as you can see, this area is scrollable, which is nice, right, when you're typing out really long areas of text. So this is looking pretty good. Now we don't have spacing, vertical spacing between these things. Now I've got a style in place for some vertical spacing, but there is also something that we can use on Material UI, which we'll take a look at here in a second. But right now, this is looking not too bad. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that my form fields aren't displaying unless I've got my values, right? Meaning that I want this label to be up here when there's a value here. Same thing on this one, so that I don't have this weird overlap, right? Because they have values, and I want to actually see my values in these two of what's already entered in. So we want to fix that. We want this to kind of look like these. So what I might do to make this look like these is change this around a little bit. Now, part of the reason that I have it working like this is because I wanted to have a click action to actually set the select value here, because we were having some problems with select getting actually selected when the value came in. Now, one way that we might do this is by adding loading spinners and then waiting for the details to be loaded before we actually have the details on the page. So again, I'm just going to say that a little bit slower. The key is we could have loading spinners be spinning here before we have the content actually loading up. So the form fields wouldn't show up until our details creature content is available. Then at that point, perhaps everything will snap into place. But first, before we do that, let's go ahead and look at what our select might look like. Now, our select is parsed out into its own component, so we're going to have to look at type editor. So we're going to move over to type editor. And I'm going to have to import for the select dropdown. Now, over here, when we were looking at components, we saw a text field, but we also saw a select. So if I come over and I look at the select, right, this is going to be happening in a specific way. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to look at what we have. So we have a select component coming in. So we're going to copy this, bring it over into the type editor, and instead of these components, I just want select. And then instead of our select, I want that select. That's our Material UI select. Then hopefully it works fairly similarly, and we can leverage a lot of what we already have. So let's look at their select. So they've got their select, but they're also using form control input label here to make it look like all of the rest of the forms. Right? So select's a little bit unique, and it looks like it also needs menu item. So we need select, we need menu item, and it looks like we need input label and form control. So this one's a little bit more complicated, right? So let's go ahead and look at what we need to bring in. So we're going to bring in form control, input label, and menu item as well. Alright, so we've got form control, input label, and menu item. Form control, input label, menu item. Looking good so far. Let's continue on and make sure that we've got all the right things here set up this same sort of way. So let's start with form control and input label down by our select. And then our menu items get looped through like this. So I'm going to copy where we're looping through with the options right here. I'm going to paste that in here, and then we're going to change it out for the menu items. So this should become menu item, menu item, and then same thing on this option here that we're looping through. So over here on materials documentation, we've got menu item, and it looks like menu item looks a lot like our option. Value, and then some sort of value. Now, in there, none, they're using an EM. This is an emphasis tag. This is just a standard HTML tag. This is not a component. So we've got an emphasis tag being used here, and that's their preference to put the emphasis tag on. Probably best for usability. So like if we want to resemble that same sort of thing here, we could put an EM tag in place here as well. But we've already got our values in place. Now this one says type. We want this to be value. And we should be able to get rid of this after we move value and the change event onto our select. And I think it's onto the select, but we'll double check by moving over to our documentation. So we do have the onChange here, and we do have the value. So we're looking pretty good there. So let's go ahead and see what that is. Now, we'll notice that input label also has this label ID on it. This is really important. This is what's associating these two things. So let's go ahead and make sure that we're associating these two things. So we want label ID to equal, and then whatever our ID is. In this case, it's going to be type. What did they use? They used type, simple select field. Okay, so we'll say type select label, and then up here we want the ID of type select label. And we want some sort of label text here if we want to associate it. This is that type here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this in here so that it can all be part of that, and then we have the associated label as part of our option down below. So they seem a little bit more alike. Now let's see what other things they're using. Oh, actually looks like we're using most of them, but this variant is what we need to add to the form control. Now we were using outline, so let's add the variant of outlined. And then we'll want to come back over and give this a test. Oh, now we're coming up with some issues. This is probably because I haven't actually removed the old code yet, so let's double check. Yep, sure enough, I've got the select still in here. I want to remove that because it can't have both of these in here because I don't have a single wrapping element, which is okay because we really don't want them both in there. We only want the new one. Now, we also had full width on here, so let's see if we can put full width on the form control and see if that works. Now, I haven't looked at the documentation, right? This might not work, but feasibly I'm thinking, this should work, question mark. Alright, so click on this, and we've got our form field, right? That's looking pretty sharp. But we want to definitely grab the thing that's going to give us our spacing, right? Because that's what's missing right now. We want spacing. And we want the spacing to be consistent. The spacing here I'm handling with my own CSS, but we want to handle it with something that's going to be consistent. So let me go ahead and commit my changes. All right, so now we want to take a look at what's going to add this spacing. Now the thing that I'm going to use is something called box. Box is kind of a layout element. What box allows us to do is just have a container around something that we can set any kind of component to. We can say it's a span, we can say it's a div, whatever is going to work for us, but the real key is we get to use these. Now this is margin, and we have margin top, margin bottom, margin left, margin right, all the way around. So we can use that on this component. Now this M for margin works on a couple different components. Box is one of those components. And we're going to use box here because box gives us what we're looking for. So I'm going to show you box illustrated on this right hand side, and then we're going to replace what's giving the space here with a box on the left hand side with the image in the image form field. So let's go ahead and use box. Out of the gate, I believe box uses a div, so we're not going to assign a component, we're just going to allow it to be. But if we come down here, the API is already listed. It says component, string, and certainly the default is a div. So we'll just leave it at that. So let's go ahead and replace these containers over on the right side. Alright, so we've got our name here, and I want box. Oop, says it's auto importing. That could be helpful. VS Code will potentially auto import if it understands what it's importing. So if I scroll up to the top, we should see that, yep, certainly box was auto imported, so I don't actually have to import it manually. Another added benefit to working with VS Code, I really do like the editor quite a bit. But we said we wanted to add margin. Now, this is a margin, but we only want the margin on the bottom. So I want MB, that's margin bottom. There's also a margin right, margin left, margin top, but we just want margin bottom equals, and then we're going to say 3. Because we used a 3 on spacing for our grid, so I'm going to say 3 is probably going to be good. Now we might want to get this a little bit tighter, but for right now we're going to use the 3. And then I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to put it around my other fields. And we can certainly see some nice spacing going on now. Again, we want this to look a little bit more consistent with what we have here, so we might try swapping that out and seeing how we work with it afterwards. So let's go ahead and take a look at that, and we see that we've got a container here, and it's a label. It's not really semantically correct, so I'm going to change this to a div, and I'm going to remove my custom styling for spacing, because now our box is handling spacing. And again, the closing label is now going to be a closing div. Now, when I click on this, it's going to swap it over to our dropdown, which, right, we've got all of our selections. This is looking pretty good right here. And actually, our stuff is not overlapping. Let's refresh this again. It's overlapping now. If I do this, it still seems to be overlapping. Why was it not overlapping before? Okay, so what we want to do is we want to get this so that it's working correctly. So let's go ahead and do that. what I think we need to do is, and this is a hypothesis, I'm thinking that we need to have the insurance that the data is available before we render the items. So what I want to look for is over here, I want to have some sort of loading, but I want to take care of the spacing with my other item being my image. So I've got my image here, and it's not using box, so I want to use box. And margin bottom of 3. Save that, come back over, margin bottom of 3. Right? That's not looking too bad. So I think we can go with that. Now I could close this in a little bit more, right? But the 3's pretty good. And then we've got these items down here that we'll come to in a minute, because these actually have additional form field stuff that we haven't switched over yet. But I want to handle these all at one time. So now let's get this working. So commit. Now, like I said, we want to wait to see if the thing is ready. And the way we wait and see is we're looking at creature details. And I want to see if creature details has an ID. So what we're going to do is set a value here that is const show fields. And what show fields is going to be is a Boolean. And it's either going to be true or false. And I'm going to say if creature details dot ID does exist, then I want it to be true. If not, I want it to be false. Now, likely this is only going to be in place for a very short period of time, but we want to show that on the page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this to hide and show my content. Now what I can do is I can come down, and on my form field I could potentially wrap the whole thing in some sort of conditional that would make it render. So how that would look is I could do it right inline, and I could say my Boolean double ampersand, and then I would put the closing bracket at the end of the form. If I save this and we come back over, certainly that corrected the issue. Right? Small blink, it doesn't even take that long before it loads, but the key is the content waits before it shows up. So then we have all of our values. That was the thing that was hurting us with the default value. The default value wasn't really ready when those components mounted, and it needed to be ready beforehand. That's why writing in the static value for default value worked, and the dynamic one did not. So all we did was make sure that our data was available by setting a Boolean that would do that check. Now, like I said, we could do a loading component here that would show. And let's look at what a loading component is going to look like. So if we come down, I believe it's right down here in wasn't utils, data display, avatar chip, divider, icon, sound, feedback progress, that's it. So we can see different kinds of loading here. All depends on how we would like to do it. Now, I kind of like the linear, so I'm thinking we'll use the linear. I'm going to copy that component, and then we'll import. Now we've already got our Boolean doing our check for us. Let's go ahead and set it up so that we have the Boolean showing instead of the form. So here I'm going to do the same thing, which is show fields ampersand, and then my linear progress. But I don't want it to show up when this is showing up, which is when the positive value is there. I want it to show up when there's a falsy value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the does not at the beginning, and then that will be looking for false value. So I should be able to come back over to my page, and we would refresh. Now you see it came in like for a split second. If I was potentially let's just set this to false here to show you. So this would be the loading. Not too bad, right? And then the content would come in. So if the loading is going to be more important for the scenario where we've actually deployed this out, because deployed, our server call might take a little bit longer than this is taking. Let's actually try and go back to our list, and we'll go through and we'll see what it is. See, I mean, this blink, it's just right there, right? So let's do the same thing for this field value here, and just make sure that we've got this available as well. And we should be able to just show the select now instead of having it in its own component with this sort of setup. And let's look at our page too, because what I don't like is the type doesn't really have something that looks like it's not showing through, right? The line looks like it's going right through our type. No bueno. So let's double check our form fields and check our select. So we've got select here, and we do have an outline one that has the appropriate outline. So let's check that out. We're looking for the second to last field on the page. It should say age. So we've got one age and two age. So it should be this one, second to last. So this is outlined just like we have on our normal one. Our input label doesn't have any additional attributes on it. And then the select here, label ID, ID, value, on change, and label age. I think this is what we need because we don't have that. So let's add that in. So our select, if we look here, right, there's no variant on it. So it's just putting that label in. So we should be able to come over to our type and add that label. Sure enough, now it's working. And we can select a different type. So if we refresh the page, we don't have it at first, and then if we click on here, we now have our select. I'm going to leave that for now. I think that that's just fine for what we've got going on here. We can swap it over at the end if we don't like it, but we've got our form fields working pretty good. So this is all looking really good. Our stuff still works because we can change this. Let's say it is approximately 90 feet. Let's say 100 feet. And we'll save this change down here. And then if we go back to details, oh, we don't see our change. That's a problem. So we're going to have to update that so that this now works. So let's see what we're getting when we get submit. All right, so we've got 100 feet. And then when you hit save change, it doesn't look like anything's working. So let's check out our submit on our edit page. Let's look at button. So we've got the button variant. My guess is its type is actually set to button and not to submit. let's do type equals submit. Now this is what I would do on a normal button. I'm not guaranteed it's going to work on my button. So we'll do 100. Because what I figured out over here, none of my events were firing off to actually do the save. There it goes. Now we're back over to details, and we've got the 100 feet. So we'll edit, we'll come over here, and we'll change it to 90 feet. Ooh, 990 feet, yikes. And then save. Now we're back over on details with the correct 90 feet. Excellent, so this is working, and everything's looking all hunky-dory. I know, I used hunky-dory. I apologize. But now we've got all of our items here, and we can totally make this work. One other thing that I'd like to show you, just as far as the form's considered, I've got it so that we can edit an image. This is not an image upload. This is only available if we have another image already loaded into the system. And I do happen to have another image loaded in for Thunderbird. And if we come over here, we've got the Thunderbird here, and we edit. And if I come in here and I enter in Thunderbird 2, so I'm going to do Thunderbird 2.jpg, and we can see the other one shows up. And it shows up immediately. That's how I have this set up. But unless I hit save down here, that's not going to get saved. So if I did back to details, still the other Thunderbird. Now, I could potentially set this up so that if you hit back to details, we get some sort of alert here, and it doesn't allow us to go back until we've saved changes, or we say, no, it's okay, we don't care. And we'll set that up. We'll take a look at how that would work here a little bit later on. But the next thing that we'll go over is how we set this up for the habitats so that when we edit these, we can delete them out, and this looks all nice, right? Like really slick, really like UI heavy, so that it's looking pretty sharp down there. And we also want it to look sharp on these pages too. So luckily the attributes and the habitats are individual components that are being shared across both the edit and the details. So we really only have to change those two components, but we want the forms to look good and everything else. So we'll be doing that one next. But that's all of our forms ready to go. So thanks for joining me for the forms. Next time, let's take a look at our habitats and our attributes.